Interceptions, box score, I get it. 2 of them are on tips. Okay, one of them is a ridiculous play by Van Ginkel to get down on the ground, tip the ball up, and the other one is a ball off a tailback's hands. It's a little high and hot, but so, you know, that you got to take into context. And then that Howard interception, the one-hander is a great play. I don't think that there's a lot that teams are going to take that Miami did that you can kind of replicate. You got to have the corners to do it. They don't. You got to have the exotic pressures that Miami does, and a lot of teams don't. And so I'd say this about that football game yesterday. The Chiefs do everything in football that you're not supposed to do, and they still are incredible to watch. You know, like you guys have heard this, you just can't flip the switch. Yes, they can. They're the only team I've ever seen that could play as poorly as they do for stretches, and then they have a quarterback that can flip the switch and a receiver that can flip the switch, and Tyreek Hill. They have the offensive player of the year. Travis Kelce's the best player in football that's not a quarterback. He's the offensive player of the year. He just flips switches, and it's like, oh, we'll score 21 in a matter of like 3 minutes. And they had 4 turnovers. You're not supposed to be able to turn a football over 4 times and win in the NFL. They were up 21 with 4 turnovers. And so they kind of break those cliches that we know of football. That being said, I thought Miami was one of the most impressive teams I watched yesterday. You know, like the way that they hung in that football game, Tua got incredibly hot. He's throwing to guys that I don't necessarily know of as household names. His ball placement and his timing and the subtlety that he plays with is remarkable. Miami's as good as I think they are. Kansas City's just them by themselves. They can just do things. They're the Warriors. The Warriors can go through stretches where they don't make a bucket for like 5 minutes, and all of a sudden they'll score 50 in a quarter.
That's fair enough. I want to say Howard, by the way, to your point, is picking off everything in sight this year. The first 2 picks by Mahomes yielded just 3 points for Miami. So when you get the opportunity, you got to cash in, and they weren't able to do so even though they jumped out to that early lead. Dan, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you on Get Up this morning at 8 a.m. Eastern with Greeny and the gang. Thank you.
Thanks
Theo.
And just a reminder, beginning Tuesday, January 5th, Mike Greenberg Show Greeny, immediately following us on ESPN Radio. Greeny will take you inside the stories of the day as only he can, have the newsmakers you'd expect, and interact with you every single weekday. From Keyshawn, J. Will, and Zubin, right into Greeny, weekday mornings on ESPN Radio, once again, starting January 5th. I want to mention one other thing, guys. The most amazing stat line of the weekend didn't go to Pat Mahomes for once, as Key said. He may be on the trade block, so whoever comes in for Pat Mahomes is still going to have, obviously, the great work of Tyreek Hill. Think about this just for 1 second. Tyreek Hill yesterday. Guys, just think about this. A lot of numbers coming here, but just think about this. 2 touches. His first 2. 2 touches, 32 rushing yards, 44 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns on 2 touches. 2 touches, 32 on the ground, 44 in the air, and 2 touchdowns. And that's why the Dolphins found out the Chiefs were a little too tough yesterday. Dan mentioned the offensive line, the big problem for the Steelers. A shell. Dan Orlovsky, a dozen years as an NFL quarterback, and very supportive of Wentz throughout the last several weeks, but I think even he, along with many others, said it was time to go to Hurts, even though Doug Peterson is not committed to Jalen for next Sunday's game in Arizona. First things first, Dan, what did you make of his performance against a Saints team that had come in with a rather nasty defense and a 9-game winning streak?
I thought he was the difference maker in the football game. You know, Doug Peterson said their offense needed a spark. I would say that Jalen Hurts was like a consistent flame because they had a really nice opening drive. And even in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, New Orleans doesn't have any tape on him. Let's see how the rest of his game plays out. And he just consistently played well. Now, listen, they coached better than they had coached all year. There's no question about that. And they played around him better than they had played all year. But he was a difference maker, and I think in 2 specific areas. One, he didn't hurt the football team. You know, his decisiveness didn't hurt their football team. And then his legs helped their football team. He was able to go make some plays, scramble from the pocket, obviously be part of the quarterback run game. And so Doug Peterson's going to name him the starter for next week. He should be the starter for the remainder of the season. He's earned that right. I said last week that Carson Wentz's poor play opened the door for this. And Jalen Hurts, you know, took advantage of it against the #1 defense in the NFL. So very impressed with his poise, but also his play.
Dan, how much with Jalen Hurts' play, how much more uncertainty did it just put on Carson Wentz about his future now?
Yeah, Key, you heard me say this last week. I think there's two things that, kind of come off of this game and then become even more of a conversation for every potential win that Jalen Hurts gets. One, the question of can we trade Carson Wentz becomes more realistic. I get the money aspect. I get the investment aspect. It's the NFL. Nothing surprises me. And so the more that they can potentially win football games, because here's the thing, they win yesterday, and if they win next week, back-to-back wins against playoff football teams or playoff trending football teams, if we're going to throw the Cardinals in there. And so that question of can we actually trade Carson Wentz does become more realistic. And then if the Eagles organization, if there's people within their organization that do believe that the draft pick in the second round of Jalen Hurts affected Carson Wentz, I think the question of can they actually both be on the roster next year becomes very much so at the forefront. Because if you think the draft pick affected him, what do you think is going to happen if Jalen Hurts plays well and gives them the chance to win the division in Week 17? Like, I don't see how you could sit there and think as an organization, you know what, the draft pick affected him, and then also have both of them on the roster next March or April. So, listen, I know it's one game, but it certainly becomes a very interesting conversation moving forward.
Now, the other quarterback on the other team, Taysom Hill, didn't have a bad day, didn't have a great day, but is the Taysom Hill magic running out, Dan?
Oh, it is. I think the Saints have to ask themselves this question. What's the most important thing for them? Is it getting the number one seed, or is it getting Drew Brees unquestionably 100% healthy? Because I don't think this team could go to Green Bay and win a football game. I think they got to make the Super Bowl. I do believe that they have to be the one seed and have home field advantage because of where they stand with their pass game and the lack of ability for Drew to throw the ball downfield. And so I think the question becomes like, all right, Drew's 90% or 95%. Do we have to get him back because we really got to get that one seed? Or do they value Drew Brees at 100% going into the playoffs, no matter if they're the one seed or not? Because I just think that, the question of, can they go on the road and win a game in Green Bay is a very real one. And we're not talking about, 30-year-old coming off 11 broken ribs in the punctured lung. We're talking 40 years old. We don't really have a good idea of how Drew is going to feel, how he's going to look. And to come off those significant injuries and within, a couple weeks have to go on the road and play in cold weather and play well to win, that's a very daunting task. So I think that's that game that the Saints have to kind of answer right now. Number one seed or get Drew 100% healthy?
Dan, how would you play it considering Drew Brees had a throwing session the other day and they still wanted to hold him out? How would you play it on bringing him back if you were the GM or coach of the team?
All right, so they play the Chiefs this weekend. I think the Chiefs will be favored in that game. So you're looking at, if they lose that game against the Chiefs, I don't see Green Bay losing. Maybe they played last week of the year against Tennessee. Obviously, they can run the ball really well. So that's not a great matchup. So, how I would play it, I think that if Drew Brees is 90% healthy and we have a conversation and he's aware, I got to get the ball out of my hands, I can't take an extra hit or something like that, then I'm saying we got to go try and secure this one seed, especially this week. I think this is the week that the one seed can be lost if you're New Orleans, totally lost. And so if Drew tells me I'm 90%, 95%, and coach, I get it. There's going to be some times where the ball just comes out because I can't take that hit. He's smart enough and aware enough to go do that. I think it's time to get back to Drew Brees if that conversation happens. Okay,
talk to me about the Steelers. How concerned are you about Pittsburgh considering they had their second loss in a row?
Tons. Again, more questions than answers. More, what do they have to lean on? What are they confident in and who are they confident? Their offensive line is a shell of what it used to be. Their offensive line used to be a strength. It is not anymore. They're not explosive on offense. Now, they haven't been explosive all year, but teams have caught up to that. Teams have figured it out. Okay, the short passing game is all that they can do, and oftentimes is all that they're willing to do. Their defense has been beat up. So the defense isn't nearly as dominant as it was. Bud Dupree being out is a huge issue. And then Big Ben, for every old quarterback, he doesn't want to get hit anymore. He doesn't want, the contact anymore. Still a really good football team. But who do we really think that they're better than in the AFC? They're not better than Kansas City. They're not better than Buffalo. I don't like them more than Miami. I like the Colts more. Yeah, like there's not a lot of teams that I'm sitting here going, okay, I feel really good about who they like in a the Browns I like more right now, especially